Hey guys, today we'll be talking about how to play the Stafford Gambit as black. So this opening starts off with the moves e4, e5, knight f3, and knight f6, which is the Petrov defense. Now after knight captures on e5, instead of the usual pawn to d6, we are going to play this move knight c6, which would be the Stafford Gambit, sacrificing our e5 pawn. So after captures, we reach this position, and the whole reason why we sacrifice the pawn is that now we can see black has a slight edge in development. The knight is ready developed on f6, the knight attacks the pawn on e4, and since there are no e7 or d7 pawns here in the black's position, our bishops are free to develop on the next move, which brings us amazing attacking opportunities. However, as you guys can see, the engine evaluation on the left shows that white is winning by plus 1.7. While the engine evaluation may indicate a winning advantage for white, it is important to note that playing perfect moves consistently is impossible for the average human player. This is because chess is a complex game with countless possibilities, and practical play can differ significantly from computer analysis. The purpose of this video is to explore strategic ideas and demonstrate the potential attacking opportunities and traps for black in the Stafford Gambit. And as you guys can see in the following variations and lines, it is actually not easy for white to play and find all the perfect moves, because white can lose really quickly if they make bad moves. So in this position, white has three options. He can play knight to c3, or he can play pawn to d3. Both moves defend the pawn on e4. The third option is white can push his pawn forward with pawn to e5 attacking our knight on f6. And we'll go through all the three lines. So let's first start with the move knight to c3. Now in most of the Stafford Gambit variations, you're going to see this very common move with bishop to c5. The bishop here controls the square on d4, and this will cause white to not be able to play the move pawn to d4, as our queen and our bishop is controlling the d4 square. Also, our bishop on c5 is looking at this pawn on f2, which can be a potential weakness in several lines after a move like knight to g4, attacking the pawn on f2. Also, our knight on g4 will be defended by our bishop as well. Now let's see what if white plays a normal developing move such as bishop to c4. Now this move, even though it looks like a natural developing move, is actually a mistake for white already, because this allows black to launch a really strong attack. Now you might be thinking that the move for black is bishop takes f2 check, king takes, queen to d4 check, and after a move like king to e1, queen captures bishop, we regain the pawn that we sacrificed in the opening, and the white's king is unable to castle anymore. But however, as you guys can see from the evaluation bar on the left, it still shows that white has a slight advantage with plus 0.5. So that means that we have an even stronger move, and it's not bishop takes f2. So as I mentioned earlier, the idea here is to play knight to g4, putting pressure and attacking this pawn on f2. Now, the most common move for white here would be to castle, getting the king to safety, and the rook defends the pawn on f2. But before we discuss this variation, there's another move that you guys have to be careful, which is this sneaky move over here, queen to f3. Now, even though we can capture the pawn on f2 with our knight or our bishop with check, because the queen doesn't really protect the f2 square, but instead, the queen is actually threatening to capture on f7, as the bishop is attacking our f7 pawn as well to give checkmate in 1. So just be careful of this move, and we need to play the move knight to e5 here. Double attack, attacking the queen and the bishop. The queen is forced to drop back to e2 to defend the bishop, and now we have a really nice attacking move with queen to h4. The whole idea of this move is our queen once again attacks the pawn on f2, and our threat is simple. We want to capture the bishop on the next move, forcing the queen away, and then capturing the pawn on f2. If white castles, this is already completely winning for black after the move bishop g4, as the queen doesn't have many squares to go. He can't block with f3 because that will leave his king vulnerable, as the pawn is pinned to our bishop. And after the queen moves, we just capture the bishop on c4 and it's an easy one piece up for us. So instead of castling, white can try to play the move pawn to g3, trying to block our threat on f2. Now, all we have to do is move our queen forward, one move, queen to h3, preventing white from castling, and bishop to g4 comes next as the pawn to g3 move weakens all the light squares around the white's position, and we gain a huge advantage as black. So instead of queen to f3 here, now let's see what if white plays castle, protecting the pawn on f2. It may seem that white's king is out of danger already, but here comes our third piece in joining the attack, which is the queen to h4, double attack, threatening mate in 1 on h2, and the queen also attacks the pawn on f2. The only move for white to avoid checkmate is by playing h3, and we just capture the pawn on f2, attacking the queen. If white captures our knight with the rook, we just recapture either with the queen or with the bishop, and we have already won material. And if white tries to move the queen away from the threat, let's say queen to f3, again threatening to capture our pawn on f7, now we have this nice double check with knight takes h3, discovered check with our bishop, and also the second check with our knight. And it doesn't matter where the king goes, king to h1 or king to h2, doesn't matter which square, our knight goes back to give double check again with our queen and our knight, and after the king moves back to g1, we play queen to h1, and this is just checkmate in 11 moves. So as you guys can see, even though the computer evaluated white's position as plus 1.7 just a few moves ago, it's very easy for black to create deadly attacking chances and win in just a few moves. But before we dive deeper into the other lines, I'd like to take a moment to ask for your support. If you're finding value in this video and enjoying the content so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more chess content. Your support motivates us to keep creating amazing chess content like this video for you. Alright, so let's go back to this position where we saw that bishop c4 was not really a good move for white, even though it looked like a normal, natural developing move. So due to the threat that due to the powerful threat of knight g4, the best move for white, or one of the best moves for white in this position, is to play the move pawn to h3, preventing our knight from jumping to g4. A key thing to note here that the move bishop e2 also protects the g4 square, but this doesn't work due to the move queen to d4, attacking the pawn on f2, threatening checkmate in 1, and after a move like castling, we can already capture back the pawn on e4, regaining back the pawn we lost in the opening. So after pawn to h3, I'm going to introduce you this very aggressive move, which is pawn to h5, further supporting the g4 square. The idea of this pawn h5 is simple. Later on, if white castled on the king side, we can play knight to g4, sacrificing our knight because we want white to capture our knight with the h-pawn, as we can capture back with our h-pawn, opening this dangerous h-file for us. So for example, if white plays bishop to e2, again trying to defend the g4 square, now we play queen to d4, attacking f2, white castles, and now here comes the move knight to g4, sacrificing a piece. White probably has to capture our knight because we are threatening to capture his pawn on f2 as well. So after captures, pawn takes, and this position is almost losing for white already. The next idea for us is to swing our queen over with a simple queen to e5, threatening queen to h2 checkmate, or queen e5, queen h5, and checkmating along the h-file. The only move for white to try and survive in this position is to play the move pawn to g3, trying to block away this diagonal. But still, we play the move queen e5 because our threat on the next move is we want to capture the pawn on g3 here, and white cannot recapture because the king is in pin by our bishop. So the only move for white here is to play king g2, protecting the g3 pawn, getting out of the pin, and potentially trying to bring his rook over, rook to h1. Because here, if we play a careless move like queen to h5, thinking it's all over, white can just defend with rook h1. Because after captures, queen captures, rook captures, king capture, and we have no attack. So instead of queen to h5. A key important move for black in this position, and it's also the only move that wins that you guys have to remember, is bishop takes f2, sacrificing another piece. Now white can recapture with the rook or with the king. So let's see what if white recaptures with the rook. Now we play the move queen to h5 because the rook is no longer on f1 and the rook can't go to h1 anymore. Our threat is simple. We want to play either queen h3 or queen h2 check, followed by queen to h1 checkmate on the next move. So white has to move his rook out of the way to give a safety square for his king. But now we play queen to h2 check. The king only has one legal move to f1, and after queen takes g3, there's just no defense for white in this position, as rook to h1 checkmate is coming and the rook on f4 is under attack. So this was the move rook takes f2. Now let's see what if king takes f2. Here we give check, rook to h2. If the king goes to e1, we just capture on g3, rook blocks, and then queen takes f2 is checkmate. So the king has to come up to e3. Now we capture this pawn with check. If the bishop or the rook blocks, we can just capture with the pawn. So the king has to come up to d4. And now we have a nice silent killing move with bishop to e6. The idea is very simple. We just cut off this square for the white king, and we can either castle or play rook to d8, bringing in another rook for the attack. Because for example, if let's say white plays a move like pawn to d3, this is already checkmate soon after pawn to c5 check. King has to capture, only move. Queen to d6 check, king has to go to b5, another only move, and now another silent killing move, which is pawn to a5, and no matter what white plays, queen to b4 checkmate or queen to c6 checkmate is coming. Alright, so let's go back to the starting position in this opening, and we have seen the main move with knight to c3. Now let's consider the other option with pawn to d3, protecting the e4 pawn. Again, our idea is always the same. We play bishop to c5 and going knight g4 on the next move. If white plays this move bishop to g5, trying to pin our knight, not allowing us to go knight to g4, also with threats of pawn to e5, winning our knight on the next move. This is actually a blunder for white because we have this brilliant move with knight takes e4, sacrificing and giving away our queen. Because after captures, we just capture on f2 with check. Our knight protects the bishop. The king has only one move to e2. Now the other bishop comes into g4, and this is checkmate. If white doesn't capture the queen, if white captures our knight instead, now we capture on f2 with our bishop. If the king captures, the queen is now hanging and we just win the whole queen. And if the king comes up, again, bishop up check and we win the queen on the next move. If white tries to defend this way with the bishop instead, we just trade the bishops and queen to h4 check is coming, threatening queen to f2 checkmate. So white has to block with pawn to g3. Now we capture the pawn without knight. Pawn captures and we win the rook on h1, and it's an easy win for black in this position. So again, even though bishop to g5 looks like a strong and natural move for white, it's actually a massive blunder and white can just lose immediately in just 6 moves. And if you guys take a look at the database, such as the Lee Chess database, you guys can see that bishop to g5 is actually played many times, with bishop to g5 being the second or the third most popular move, if I'm not mistaken. So now let's see what if white tries the same thing in the first variation, where knight c3 followed by h3. So pawn to h3 here, trying to prevent us from going knight to g4. Again, we play the aggressive move pawn to h5, preparing our knight to jump to g4. And there's an important thing to note here, that after pawn to h3, we cannot capture the pawn on e4 like we did previously, thinking that we can win the queen, because after captures, bishop captures on f2. If the king takes, we win the queen. So the king has to come up, and now we see that pawn to h3 protects the g4 square, and we no longer have the move bishop to g4. So even though the king is stuck in the center, we have given up a piece, the knight, and now we just have no attack, and this position is losing for us. So be careful. So pawn to h5, bishop to e2, and now the move to remember here is queen to d6 and not queen to d4. The reason why queen to d6 is stronger and not queen to d4 is because if you take a look at this position, it's actually almost the same position as we discussed previously in the first line with knight to c3. The only difference is that the knight was on c3 and the pawn was still on d3. Sorry, the pawn was still on d2 and not on d3. So now if we play queen to d4, later on, white has defensive resources with bishop up to e3 since the pawn has already developed, or bishop to f4 over here later on, not allowing us to obtain this diagonal that we need for the attack. So queen to d6, castle. Now we have a really nice move with bishop takes h3, sacrificing our bishop. The whole idea of this sacrifice is after pawn takes, now we see the power of the move queen to d6 as we can give this nasty queen to g3 check. The pawn cannot capture because the king is in pin from our bishop. So the king has to move to the side. Now after captures, king move bishop to d6, and there's just no defense against queen to h2 checkmate. If white tries to block with f4, now we play knight to g4. Again, we see the power of the h5 pawn supporting the knight, threatening to give checkmate on h2. If bishop captures, we give check first, forcing the king to the edge of the board, followed by pawn captures bishop, checkmate. Now of course, white is not forced to capture our bishop on h3, and the best move according to the engine here for white is to play the move king to h1, in which we just retreat our bishop, and we are very happy with our position already because we regain our pawn that we sacrificed in the opening, and our attacking threats are still the same. We're going to play knight g4 on the next move, threatening knight takes f2. We can swing our queen over this way as well, threatening checkmate, and anytime that white captures our knight on g4, we just recapture back with the pawn, opening up this h-file for the rook. So remember this move, aggressive move, pawn to h5, as it can create plenty of deadly attacking opportunities for us. Last but not least, we have discussed knight c3 and pawn to d3. Now we need to talk about what if pawn to e5, attacking our knight. Now we just jump our knight forward, knight to e4, and here white has two options. He can play pawn to d3 or pawn to d4, which are the most played and popular options. Pawn to d3 is actually a mistake. Again, even though this move looks like a very natural move, opening up the diagonal for the bishop and attacking our knight at the same time, it's a mistake due to the move bishop to c5. We are not forced to move our knight, and in fact we want white to capture our knight because a similar idea that we've seen in the past, bishop takes f2 check, the king can't capture because the queen hangs, so king to e2 is the only move, and then bishop to g4 check, we win the queen. And if white plays the move bishop to e3, trying to block the diagonal, we just capture, pawn captures, and again, similar idea we've seen in the past, queen to h4 check, pawn to g3, knight captures, pawn captures, queen takes rook, and this is winning for us. So pawn to d3 is winning for black, and now we need to discuss what if white plays pawn to d4. Here we have a last trick for black, which is to play the move queen h4, threatening to capture on f2, mate in 1. A very natural move for white to defend is to play the move pawn to g3, attacking our queen and blocking queen's diagonal. However, again, this is a mistake because knight takes g3. If pawn takes, we just take the rook. So white has to capture back with the f-pawn. Now queen to e4 check, double attack, and we win the rook. And that wraps up our video on how to play the Stafford Gambit. We've explored the key ideas and strategies behind this exciting opening, giving you the tools to surprise and attack your opponents. If you found this video informative and enjoyable, we greatly appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more chess content. In the comment section below, let us know which variation of the Stafford Gambit is your favorite and why. Thanks for watching, and we see you in the next video.